The trees are finally changing, and I am more than a little bit excited about it. The Sony A7iii is my main shooter. I use it every single day professionally, and when it was released in April of 2018, it was revolutionary for its price to performance ratio. And today we're gonna be talking about why I think that this is still a great camera almost 4 years later. So you guys ready? Let's get to it. Okay, so before we really get into it and talk about the Sony A7iii, I just wanted to put a disclaimer here. I don't think that if you're at the beginner or the hobbyist or the prosumer level, you should always be striving to have the newest of the new camera on the market. This goes for all tech. Cameras, cell phones, cars, you could spend your whole life just trying to stay up to date with those things, and it's just not very cost effective. With all that being said, I personally would love to upgrade from the A7iii to something more like the A7S III, but it's never in stock, so I'm stuck with the A7iii right now. But that's not to say that the A7iii isn't a good camera at the beginner or the hobbyist level. I just personally use my camera to make a living, so my needs are a little bit stricter than most people. But enough about that, let's talk about what I really like about the Sony A7iii and why it's my main shooter right now. So the Sony A7iii was my first full frame camera. I bought it for $1,500 and I switched from a crop sensor, the M50, to the full frame A7iii, and it was pretty jarring how much nicer the images looked, especially in low light situations. Sony A7iii features a 24 megapixel Exmor-R CMOS sensor, and I thought that 24 megapixels was the perfect walking the line between high resolution photos and good low light performance in video. So I was kind of upset to see that the A7 IV is 33 megapixels because that's potentially more noise in low light situations, but I think it's more on a camera to camera basis because the A7 IV looks great in low light in my opinion. And speaking of sensors, the A7iii does have IBIS or in-body image stabilization, and basically the sensor just moves around to compensate for whatever micro jitters you have in your hand. It keeps the image a little bit smoother, but it's not the most consistent that I've ever used. It does tend to lag at times and then snap to at the last second. So if I had to, I would give it like a 5 out of 10 on the IBIS. While we're on the topic of sensor size, here's an example with the exact same scenario for both cameras, one of them being my A7iii and the other being the M50, which is a much smaller sensor, and you can definitely see the difference pretty much right off the bat. Regarding photo, the 7iii shoots JPEG and RAW up to 10 frames per second with the mechanical shutter, and because it has dual memory card slots, you can set them to copy to the second card or to put RAW on the first card and JPEG on the second. You can set it pretty much however you want. And on the topic of the mechanical shutter, the A7iii has a silent shooting mode, so you can turn the mechanical shutter off so you don't disturb like a wedding or any wildlife that you're trying to shoot, but it doesn't have the feature that the A7 IV included, which is the shutter will close and protect your sensor if you're changing lenses. So there are a lot of different video modes in the Sony A7iii, and I'm just gonna breeze through them real quick and then we can talk about them after. So there's 4K 30, there's 4K 24, 1080p 120, 1080p 60, 1080p 30, and 1080p 24. There are other ones, but I never use them, and the main ones that I'm using most of the time is 4K 24 and 1080p 120. It got super cold out like overnight for some reason, so that's why I'm dressed up like an Eskimo. But while we're talking about the modes on the A7iii, one of the ones that I use all the time is the built-in intervalometer, which I know is old news as far as camera technology is concerned, but I don't really find any use out of the S&Q mode, which is like the in-body time-lapse or slow motion mode. I'd much rather do a time-lapse with the intervalometer because there's more control and it looks better at the end. But anyway, I'm gonna go shoot some time-lapses and I'm gonna leave you guys to watch some test footage of the A7iii, and when I get back, we're gonna talk about why I wanna upgrade my camera. brings me to one of the main reasons I want to update the A7 III to the A7S III. I shoot a lot of wedding videos for a living, and the industry standard is 4K 60, and the A7 III doesn't do 4K slow-mo, unfortunately. You're either in 4K or you're shooting slow-mo in 1080p. That's not to say that the A7 III isn't good if you're a hobbyist or you're just shooting YouTube videos. It's just to say that if you need 4K 60, the A7 III doesn't do it. Something it does do that's really nice though are picture profiles. All your standard Sony picture profiles are here, like H-Log, Cine, S-Log, and if you do any color grading, you know why those are useful. Basically, it's just flat profiles that are easier to, well, not easier to color grade, but just more fun to color grade, let's put it that way. The only other thing internally that I want to talk about on the A7 III that's software based is the menu system, and it's the old Sony menu system, which is
god-awful.
That's the nicest way I can put it. It's just not very well labeled. It's all jumbled. You have to search for things for no reason. I don't really know what they were going for with the menu system, but the new Sony menu system is pretty good. So that's one of the reasons I want to upgrade, but not a primary reason, more of a secondary reason. This of course brings us to the outside of the Sony A7 III, and it's not anything great, but it's not anything horrible either. And what I mean by that is the ergonomics are fine. Like the grip feels good. It's nice and solid feeling in the hand when you're shooting with it. The buttons are okay. Some of them need to be a little bit more tactile because they're kind of mushy and you can't tell when you've pressed them or not, including the shutter button. The hatch doors on the side are kind of horrible because they just hang from like a string instead of actually being doors like on the newer models. And I think my biggest gripe with the outside of the A7 III is the screen. Both the viewfinder and the screen on the A7 III are pretty lackluster. They're not bright, they're not sharp, and the screen is non-articulating, so it just tilts up and down and that's it. If you vlog a lot or you work on a gimbal often, then this is going to be a real problem because you're not going to be able to see yourself when you're vlogging, and if the gimbal's arm gets in the way of the camera, you're not going to be able to see what you're shooting. So in closing and as an overview, I think the A7 III is still a wonderful camera objectively, especially if you're a beginner or a hobbyist. But if you're a professional and your images pay your bills, I think if you were to buy the A7 III in 2021 or 2022, you would outgrow it pretty much immediately. Unfortunately, with how quickly technology moves nowadays, 4 years is a really long time. I don't know anybody with a 4-year-old cell phone, so why should your camera be any different? And you might be completely different than I am. You might like having a 20-year-old camera. It is what it is. It's not really like for me to decide. What I'm saying is, if you like being somewhat up to date, you'll probably outgrow the A7 III pretty quickly. I like staying in the 1 to 2 year range because you're not paying full price, but you're not completely out of date either. And that's all I really have to say about it. If you got anything out of this video, consider going down and hitting the like button. It means the world to content creators like me. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Sam Has a Spending Problem, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.